The gunshot that killed her mother was still ringing in Eleanor's ears 3 years later, when she watched her father drag 10-year-old Lily down the dusty main street of Golden, Colorado, heading straight for the saloon where the flesh traders did their business. Eleanor was 13 then, too young to stop him and too old not to understand exactly what was happening. Her fingers digging into the splintered wood of their cabin doorframe hard enough to draw blood as she watched her father sell her baby sister for $200 and a bottle of whiskey. The year was 1875, and the Colorado Territory had just become a state, bringing with it a flood of prospectors, gamblers, and men who dealt in human misery. Eleanor's father, Thomas Preston, had been a decent man once, before the mine collapse that crushed his legs and the fever that took his wife. Grief and laudanum had hollowed him out, left him desperate and mean. But nothing, no amount of pain or addiction, could excuse what he did that sweltering August afternoon when he handed Lily over to Marcus Vance, a man whose string of brothels stretched from Denver to Santa Fe. Eleanor ran after them, her worn boots kicking up dust, her cotton dress soaked with sweat and tears. She burst through the saloon doors just in time to see Vance's men loading Lily into a reinforced wagon alongside 3 other girls, all wide-eyed and terrified. Lily's small face appeared at the barred window, her mouth forming Eleanor's name, but no sound came out. Their father stood on the boardwalk, counting his blood money with shaking hands, refusing to meet Eleanor's eyes. "Please," Eleanor begged Vance, grabbing his sleeve. "Please don't take her. She's just a baby." Vance was a tall man with cold gray eyes and a smile that never reached them. He looked down at Eleanor with something like amusement. "Your daddy made a deal, girl. Business is business. You want her back, you bring me $200. Until then, she belongs to me." Eleanor threw herself at the wagon, trying to climb up to the window, but rough hands yanked her back. She hit the dirt hard, tasting blood and dust, and by the time she struggled to her feet, the wagon was already rolling down the street, Lily's pale face disappearing into the distance. Eleanor screamed until her voice gave out, then crawled back to their cabin where her father had already passed out drunk. She looked at him sprawled across the floor, this man who was supposed to protect them, and something inside her turned to iron. She left that night with nothing but the clothes on her back, her mother's silver locket, and a promise carved into her heart. She would find Lily, and she would bring her home, no matter how long it took or what it cost. The next 5 years were a brutal education. Eleanor learned that $200 might as well have been $2,000 for a girl with no family and no prospects. She worked every honest job she could find, scrubbing floors in Denver boarding houses, waiting tables in rough mining camps, even panning for gold alongside grizzled prospectors who taught her to shoot in exchange for her cooking. She saved every penny, living on scraps and sleeping in stables when she had to. But every time she got close to her goal, something would happen. A robbery, an emergency, a winter so harsh she had to choose between freezing and spending her savings on shelter. Worse than the poverty was the not knowing. Vance's operation moved constantly, always one step ahead of the law and the handful of reformers trying to shut him down. Eleanor chased rumors across the territory, each whispered story leading her to another dead end. Lily had been seen in Santa Fe. No, it was Albuquerque. Someone swore they saw her in a brothel in Dodge City. Each false lead carved another piece out of Eleanor's soul, but she kept searching, kept hoping, because giving up would mean admitting her sister was lost forever. By 1880, Eleanor was 18 years old and exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical work. She had $97 saved, which felt both impossibly far from her goal and impossibly hard won. She was working at her ranch outside Golden, cooking for the hands and tending the kitchen garden, when she heard that Marcus Vance was back in town. Her heart had nearly stopped when the foreman mentioned it over breakfast, talking about how Vance was looking to expand his operations, how he was flashing money around like it grew on trees. Eleanor knew she should wait, should be smart about this. But 5 years of patience had worn through, and the thought of Vance being so close, of maybe finally getting information about Lily, made her reckless. She waited until her shift ended, then walked into town with her mother's locket in her pocket and desperation singing in her veins. The saloon where Vance held court was nicer than the one where her father had made his devil's bargain, but it stank of the same corruption. Eleanor pushed through the evening crowd, ignoring the catcalls and grabbing hands, until she spotted Vance at a corner table playing cards with 3 other men. He was older now, gray streaking his dark hair, but she would have recognized those cold eyes anywhere. She walked right up to his table and said, "I need to talk to you about Lily Preston." Vance didn't even look up from his cards. "Don't know the name." "Yes, you do. You bought her from Thomas Preston 5 years ago. She was 10 years old. I want to know where she is." That got his attention. Vance's eyes flicked up, studied her for a long moment, then he laughed. "The big sister. You've got spine, I'll give you that, but that piece of information is going to cost you." "How much?" Eleanor's hands were shaking, but she kept her voice steady. "More than you've got, sweetheart. Now run along before you get yourself in trouble." One of the other players, a young man Eleanor hadn't really looked at, set down his cards. "The girl asked you a civil question, Vance. Seems only decent to give her a civil answer." Vance's smile went sharp. "This doesn't concern you, Sutton." "I'm making it concern me." The young man stood up, and Eleanor finally got a good look at him. He was tall and lean, probably mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was all angles and shadows in the lamplight, but his eyes were a startling clear blue, and they were fixed on Vance with unmistakable challenge. His last name was clearly Sutton, which meant his first name didn't matter for her purposes, but something about the way he carried himself, the way he'd stepped in without hesitation, made Eleanor's breath catch. "Yates Sutton, always the hero," Vance said, standing as well. "You might own half the county, but you don't own me, so sit down and mind your business." "Can't do that," Yates Sutton said mildly. "Not when you're being discourteous to a lady. Now, you going to answer her question, or do we need to take this outside?" The saloon had gone quiet. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the 2 men face off, Vance's hand drifting toward his gun. But Yates didn't move, didn't even tense, just stood there with his hands loose at his sides and a calm expression that was somehow more threatening than any show of aggression. Vance was the first to look away. "Fine. Last I heard, the girl was moved to one of my establishments in Santa Fe. That was 3 years ago. She could be anywhere now, happy." "Where in Santa Fe?" Eleanor demanded. "The Red Rose on the east side, but don't get your hopes up. Girls like that, they don't last long. She's probably dead or ruined beyond saving." Vance gathered his money and walked out, his shoulder deliberately bumping Eleanor's as he passed. Eleanor stood frozen, Vance's words echoing in her head. Probably dead. Probably dead. 5 years of searching, and that was all she had. Her legs suddenly felt too weak to hold her, and she swayed, the room tilting. A strong hand caught her elbow. "Easy there," Yates Sutton said. "Come on, let's get you some air." He guided her outside and around the corner to a bench, his grip steady but gentle. The cool night air helped clear her head, though her heart still felt like it was being crushed in a vice. She sat down hard, pressing her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back tears. "Thank you," she managed. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Yates sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. Marcus Vance is a snake. I've been trying to run him out of Colorado for 2 years now. You're really looking for your sister. Eleanor lowered her hands and looked at him properly for the first time. In the moonlight, Yates Sutton looked younger, less intimidating. There was kindness in his face, real concern in those blue eyes. Something about that kindness cracked the dam she'd been holding in place, and the whole story came pouring out. Her father's betrayal. 5 years of searching. The cruel arithmetic of trying to save enough money to buy back a life. Yates listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the street. Finally, he said, "Santa Fe is a long journey. You planning to go alone?" "I don't have a choice." "Yes, you do." He turned to face her. "I'm heading down to New Mexico next week to look at some horses. I could use someone to help with the camp cooking and such. Pay is good, and it would get you to Santa Fe safely. Once we're there, I've got connections. We can find this Red Rose place and get your sister out." Eleanor stared at him. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Yates said simply. "And because Marcus Vance makes my blood boil. I've heard stories about the girls in his operations, the things that happen to them. If I can help you save even one of them, I'm going to do it." "So what do you say? You want to find your sister, or not?" Eleanor should have been suspicious, should have questioned why this stranger was offering to help. But there was something in Yates Sutton's face, a straightforward honesty that she recognized instinctively. He meant exactly what he said, no hidden motives, no secret prices. And more than that, he was offering her something she'd never had before, a real chance. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want to find her." They left Golden a week later, just as summer was settling into its full blazing heat. Yates had a sturdy wagon loaded with supplies and 3 horses. A big roan gelding he rode himself, a dappled mare for Eleanor, and a pack horse for their gear. He'd been as good as his word about the pay, advancing her $20 before they even left town, money she immediately sent to the woman she rented a room from to cover her absence. The journey south was a revelation. Eleanor had traveled plenty in the last 5 years, but always alone, always watching her back, always exhausted. Traveling with Yates was different. He was competent in a way that spoke of years in the saddle, setting up camp efficiently each evening and cooking surprisingly good coffee over the fire. More than that, he was easy company. He didn't press her for conversation when she was tired, but when they did talk, he listened like her words actually mattered. "How'd you end up owning half a county?" Eleanor asked one night as they sat by the fire somewhere in northern New Mexico. They'd been on the trail for nearly 2 weeks, and the initial awkwardness had worn away into something comfortable. Yates smiled, poking at the fire with a stick. "My grandfather came west during the first gold rush. He got lucky, found a decent claim, then was smart enough to sell it at the peak and buy land instead. My father built it up from there. When he died 3 years ago, it all came to me. I'm not rich like the railroad barons, but I've got enough to live on and help out where I can. Most men with land and money don't go out of their way to help strange girls in saloons. Most men should." Yates glanced at her across the fire. "My mother always said that how you treat people who can't do anything for you shows who you really are. She died when I was 15, but that lesson stuck. When I saw you standing up to Vance, knew I had to do something. You've got courage, Eleanor, more than most people I've met." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from men like Yates. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd learned that he was 25, had never been married, and ran his ranch with a fair hand that earned loyalty from his workers. He could read and write, which wasn't common out here, and sometimes in the evenings he would pull out a battered book of poetry and read aloud while Eleanor mended clothes or prepared food. He never acted like she was a burden or an obligation. He treated her like an equal, like her opinion mattered, like she was worth his time and effort. It was terrifying how much she was starting to care about him. They reached Santa Fe on a blazing afternoon in mid-August, the adobe buildings glowing golden in the sun. Eleanor's stomach twisted with nerves as they rode into the city. After 5 years, she was finally going to find out what happened to Lily. The hope was almost worse than the uncertainty had been, because now there was a real chance of devastating answers. Yates had contacts in Santa Fe, men he'd done business with over the years. They asked around discreetly about the Red Rose, and what they learned made Eleanor sick. It was one of Vance's more notorious establishments, catering to men with cruel tastes. The girls there rarely lasted more than a few years before they were used up and discarded. But there was good news, too. The proprietor was a woman named Rosa who had a reputation for being marginally less evil than Vance himself. She sometimes let girls go if someone could pay their debts off. "How much?" Eleanor asked the man who'd brought this information, a grizzled trader named Jim. Jim shook his head. "Depends on the girl and how long she's been there. Could be hundreds of dollars, could be more." Eleanor felt her hope crumbling. She had $97 saved and the 20 Yates had paid her. It wouldn't be enough, it would never be enough. But Yates said quietly, "We'll figure it out. First, let's see if she's even there." The Red Rose was on the east side of Santa Fe, just like Vance had said. A large house painted a faded red with barred windows and a guard at the door. Eleanor and Yates approached in the early evening, both of them cleaned up and dressed as respectably as they could manage. Yates had suggested Eleanor pretend to be his wife looking for a lost cousin, a story that would hopefully get them inside without raising suspicion. The guard was a huge man with a scarred face and dead eyes. He looked them over, clearly skeptical, but when Yates slipped him $5, he let them pass. Inside, the house was nicer than Eleanor expected, decorated with velvet furniture and oil paintings, but the luxury couldn't hide the underlying atmosphere of misery. Girls in various stages of undress lounged around the parlor, their eyes empty, their smiles painted on. A woman swept into the room, tall and imperious in a dark red dress. This had to be Rosa. She was beautiful in a hard way, her black hair swept up in an elaborate style, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "You're Sutton," she said to Yates. "Jim said you might come by. You're looking for a girl." "My wife's cousin," Yates said smoothly, his hand finding the small of Eleanor's back in a gesture that looked casually affectionate but made her heart race. "Lily Preston. She'd be about 15 now, blonde hair, blue eyes. She was brought here about 3 years ago." Rosa's expression flickered, something almost like regret crossing her face. "I remember the girl, young, pretty, terrified out of her mind. Vance brought her himself, said she was special. I kept her as long as I could, but..." "But what?" Eleanor's voice came out strangled. "But Vance moved her about a year ago. Said she'd bring better money at one of his high-end establishments. I don't know where she is now. Vance keeps that information close. I'm sorry." Eleanor felt the world tilt. Another dead end. Another year of Lily's life lost to searching. She swayed, and Yates's arm wrapped around her waist, holding her up. "Is there any way to find out where Vance sent her?" Yates asked. Rosa hesitated, then said, "Vance keeps records. Everything is documented, every girl, every transaction. He's paranoid about being double-crossed, so he writes it all down and keeps the ledgers locked up at his main office in Denver. If you want to know where your girl is, that's where you'd find out." Can you tell us how to access those records?" Yates's voice was calm, but Eleanor could feel the tension in his body. Breaking into Vance's office would be suicide. He's got guards, locks, the whole works, and if he catches you, you'll both disappear. But Rosa looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, and something softened in her hard face. "There's a woman who works for Vance doing his books. Her name is Catherine Reed. She's got access to all the records. She also hates Vance because he's holding her sister in one of his establishments as leverage. If you could help her get her sister out, she might help you." It was the first real lead Eleanor had gotten in years, and she grabbed onto it like a lifeline. "Where can we find her?" Rosa gave them an address in Denver, then added, "Be careful. Vance has eyes everywhere. If he finds out you're moving against him, he'll kill you without a second thought." They left the Red Rose and walked back through the darkening streets of Santa Fe in silence. Eleanor felt hollowed out, scraped raw. 5 years of searching, and she was still chasing shadows. Lily was still out there somewhere, still trapped, still suffering, and Eleanor was no closer to saving her than she'd been the day she watched that wagon roll away. "Eleanor," Yates said softly when they reached their hotel, "we're going to find her, I promise you. You can't promise that." Eleanor's voice broke. "She could be anywhere, she could be dead. I've spent 5 years on this and I'm still failing her." "You're not failing her. You're fighting for her, that matters." Yates turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Listen to me. We're going to Denver. We're going to find this Catherine Reed. We're going to get those records, and we're going to find Lily. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. I'm not giving up, and I'm not letting you give up either." Eleanor looked up at him, this man who barely knew her but had turned his whole life upside down to help her. In the lamplight spilling from the hotel windows, his face was all earnest determination and fierce protectiveness. Something shifted in her chest, a feeling she'd been trying to ignore for weeks now suddenly undeniable. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Really?" Yates's hands tightened on her shoulders. "At first it was because it was the right thing to do, but now—" He hesitated, his blue eyes searching her face. "Now it's because I can't stand to see you hurting. Because somewhere along the trail, you stopped being a stranger I was helping and became the most important person in my world. I know this isn't the time, and I know you've got bigger things to worry about, but Eleanor, I've fallen for you. Hard. And I'm going to help you find your sister because that's what matters to you, and what matters to you matters to me." Eleanor couldn't breathe. She'd spent 5 years focused solely on finding Lily, had convinced herself she didn't have room for anything else in her life. But Yates had slipped past her defenses without even trying, with his steady kindness and quiet strength, and the way he looked at her like she was brave instead of broken. And now, standing in the warm New Mexico night with his hands on her shoulders and his heart in his eyes, she realized she'd fallen for him too. "Yates," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let someone in while I'm still so torn up inside." "Then let me help hold you together," he said, and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, giving her every chance to pull away. But Eleanor didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with 5 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope. Yates's arms wrapped around her, holding her close, and for the first time since she'd watched Lily disappear, Eleanor felt like maybe she wasn't alone in this fight anymore. They traveled back to Colorado a week later, the journey passing in a haze of planning and stolen moments. At night, after they'd made camp, Yates would hold Eleanor close and they'd talk about everything except the task ahead. He told her about his childhood on the ranch, about the time he'd nearly died from a rattlesnake bite, about his dreams of building something good and lasting. She told him about her mother, about the happy years before the mine collapse, about how Lily used to sing all the time, her voice sweet and clear. "When we find her, I'm going to get her voice back," Eleanor said one night, her head resting on Yates's shoulder. "I'm going to make sure she remembers how to sing." "We'll both make sure," Yates promised, kissing the top of her head. Denver was bigger than Eleanor remembered, sprawling and busy with commerce and vice in equal measure. They found rooms at a respectable boarding house and spent their first few days gathering information. Catherine Reed worked as a bookkeeper out of a small office near Vance's main operations, and she was exactly what Rosa had described. Sharp-eyed and bitter, with the trapped look of someone who'd made a deal with the devil and was still paying for it. Approaching her was risky, but they didn't have a choice. Yates used his business connections to arrange a meeting under the guise of needing bookkeeping services. Catherine received them in her cramped office, suspicion written all over her face. "I do books for legitimate businesses," she said coldly. "Whatever you're really here for, I'm not interested." "Rosa from the Red Rose sent us," Eleanor said quietly, and Catherine went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Your sister is being held at one of Vance's establishments. We know because we're trying to find someone too." "My sister. Rosa said you might help us if we could help you." Catherine stared at them for a long moment, her face a careful blank. Then slowly she stood and locked the office door, pulled the curtains shut. When she turned back, the mask had cracked, showing desperate hope underneath. "You can get my sister out. Elizabeth, we can try," Yates said, "but we need information first. We need to know where Eleanor's sister is, and we need to know the layout of Vance's operations. Give us access to the records, and I swear we'll do everything we can to free your sister too." Catherine sank back into her chair, her hands shaking. "If Vance finds out, he'll kill us all." "He won't find out," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "Please. I've been searching for 5 years. This is my only chance." Something in Eleanor's voice must have convinced her, because Catherine nodded slowly. "Vance keeps the main ledgers in his office, but I have copies of the most recent transactions. Girls who have been moved in the last 2 years. If your sister was moved from Santa Fe a year ago, she should be in there." She pulled out a key from under her desk, used it to unlock a drawer, and withdrew a thick leather-bound journal. "I keep this as insurance in case Vance ever turns on me. It's got locations, names, everything." She opened the journal, flipping through pages covered in neat handwriting. Eleanor held her breath, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. Then Catherine stopped, her finger on a line of text. Lily Preston, age 14, moved from the Red Rose to the Silver Slipper in Cheyenne, Wyoming. August 1879. Catherine looked up. "That's almost a year ago." "She could have been moved again since then." "But it's a starting point," Yates said. "Catherine, where's your sister?" "The Velvet Room here in Denver. Elizabeth Reed, age 17. She's been there for 2 years. Catherine's voice broke. "I've been trying to buy her freedom, but Vance keeps raising the price. He knows I'll never be able to afford it. He likes having leverage over me." Eleanor knew that cruelty intimately, the way men like Vance used love as a weapon. She reached across the desk and took Catherine's hand. "We're going to get them both out. All of us. We're going to burn Vance's empire to the ground." Over the next 2 weeks, they planned carefully. Yates used his money and connections to gather information about Vance's operations, mapping out locations and guard schedules. Catherine provided detailed records, including the financial debts Vance claimed each girl owed. The numbers were staggering, deliberately inflated to keep the girls trapped forever. Lily supposedly owed $1,800. Elizabeth's debt was listed at $2,200. "It's all lies," Catherine said bitterly. The real debt is maybe a quarter of that, but Vance adds interest and fees and charges for food and clothes. The girls can never earn enough to pay it off. Then we don't pay it, Yates said. We go to the law. Catherine laughed harshly. Half the lawmen in Denver are in Vance's pocket. You think they'll help? Not the local law, federal marshals. What Vance is doing is trafficking across state lines. That's a federal crime. If we can give the marshals enough evidence, they'll have to act. It was dangerous and complicated, but it was also their best chance. They spent days building their case, collecting testimony from girls who'd escaped Vance's operations, copying records from Catherine's ledgers, mapping out the locations of every establishment Vance controlled. Eleanor threw herself into the work with fierce determination, because staying busy meant she didn't have to think about how close they were to the end, how much could still go wrong. At night, she found comfort in Yates's arms. They were sharing a room now, propriety abandoned in favor of honesty and need. He held her when nightmares woke her, her dreams full of Lily's face and wagons rolling away into darkness. He reminded her to eat when she forgot, forced her to rest when she pushed too hard. And slowly, gradually, Eleanor realized that what she felt for Yates had deepened from attraction into something much more profound. He'd become her anchor, her safe place, the person who knew all her broken pieces and loved her anyway. When this is over, she said one night, curled against his chest in their narrow bed, what happens to us? Yates's arms tightened around her. That's up to you. But I hope what happens is you come back to Golden with me, you and Lily both. I've got a big house that's too empty, and I could use someone to fill it up with noise and life. Someone who'll argue with me and keep me honest and wake up beside me every morning for the rest of my life. Eleanor's breath caught. Yates, are you asking me to marry you? Not officially. Not yet. Not until we get Lily back and you've had time to breathe. But yeah, Eleanor, that's what I want. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want everything with you if you'll have me. Eleanor kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. Love and gratitude and hope and fear all tangled up together. Yes, she whispered against his mouth. Yes, when this is done, I want all of that too. The federal marshal they finally connected with was a weathered man named Tom Garrett, who'd made a career out of chasing down the worst criminals the West had to offer. He listened to their story with careful attention, studying the evidence they'd compiled, then sat back in his chair and said, "This is enough to bring Vance down. More than enough. But it's going to take time. We'll need to coordinate raids on multiple locations simultaneously, so he can't move the girls before we get to them. That means getting marshals into position in 4 different cities without tipping Vance off. It could take weeks." "We don't have weeks," Eleanor said desperately. "My sister is in Cheyenne. Every day we wait is another day she's trapped there. I understand, but if we move too fast and Vance gets wind of it, he'll scatter. We'll lose our chance to shut him down completely." Marshal Garrett's expression softened. "I know it's hard, but patience now means we save not just your sister, but dozens of other girls." Eleanor wanted to scream. She'd been patient for 5 years, but Yates squeezed her hand and she forced herself to nod. "How long? 3 weeks, maybe 4. I'll work as fast as I can." Those weeks were the longest of Eleanor's life. They stayed in Denver, helping Marshal Garrett coordinate his operation, but the waiting ate at her. She was so close now, closer than she'd ever been, and the fear that something would go wrong was almost paralyzing. Yates stayed close, his steady presence the only thing keeping her grounded. Catherine was scared too, jumping at shadows, terrified that Vance would somehow discover their plan. But she was also lit up with hope for the first time in years, talking about what she'd do with Elizabeth once she was free. The life they'd build together far away from Denver and men like Marcus Vance. Finally, on a crisp October morning, Marshal Garrett called them to his office. "We're ready. Raids are scheduled for tomorrow at dawn. Denver, Cheyenne, Santa Fe, and Dodge City all at the same time. We've got men in position and warrants for Vance and his top associates. With luck, this time tomorrow, it'll be over." Eleanor couldn't sleep that night. She lay in Yates's arms, watching moonlight creep across the ceiling, her mind a whirl of hope and terror. "What if she doesn't remember me?" she whispered. "It's been 5 years. She was just a child when they took her." "She'll remember," Yates said with quiet certainty. "You're her sister. That doesn't go away just because time has passed. And even if she doesn't remember right away, you'll remind her. You'll show her who she used to be, and you'll help her become who she wants to be now. That's what love does." Eleanor turned in his arms, burying her face against his chest. "I'm scared. I know. But you're also brave. Braver than anyone I've ever met. And tomorrow that bravery is going to bring your sister home." Dawn came cold and gray. Eleanor and Yates were at Marshal Garrett's office before the sun was fully up, Catherine arriving moments later. They couldn't participate in the actual raids, but Garrett had agreed to let them wait at his office for news. The first target in Denver was the Velvet Room where Elizabeth was being held. Then, as soon as that was secure, they'd receive word from Cheyenne. The waiting was torture. Eleanor paced the office like a caged animal while Catherine sat frozen in a chair, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. Yates stood by the window, watching the street, his presence a silent support. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, Marshal Garrett's deputy burst through the door. "Got them. The Velvet Room is secure. 12 girls recovered, 3 men in custody including the manager, and we found Elizabeth Reed." Catherine let out a sob and covered her face with her hands. The deputy smiled. "She's being brought here now, madam. You'll see her in just a few minutes." The reunion was everything beautiful and heartbreaking at once. Elizabeth Reed stumbled into the office supported by a female marshal, looking fragile and scared in a stained dress that had once been fine. She was thin, dark circles under her eyes, but when she saw Catherine, her face transformed. They crashed into each other, both of them crying, holding on like they'd never let go. Eleanor watched with tears streaming down her own face, letting herself hope that in a few hours she'd have the same reunion with Lily. Yates pulled her close, and she let herself lean on him, drawing strength from his solid warmth. Then they waited some more. Denver was secured, then Santa Fe. Both raids had been successful, with dozens of girls freed and several of Vance's associates arrested. But there was still no word from Cheyenne. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Eleanor's anxiety mounted. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Finally, near 2 o'clock, a telegram arrived. Marshal Garrett read it, his face going grim. "Cheyenne raid was successful. The Silver Slipper is shut down, 15 girls recovered, but—" He looked at Eleanor and she saw the bad news in his eyes before he spoke. "Lily Preston wasn't there. The manager says she was moved 2 months ago. He doesn't know where." The world went gray around the edges. Eleanor heard someone making a horrible keening sound and realized distantly it was her. Then Yates was there, holding her up, holding her together while she shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Where?" Yates demanded, his voice hard. "Where did they move her?" The manager claims he doesn't know. Says Vance himself came and took her, didn't say where he was going. But Vance was arrested this morning in Santa Fe. He's being brought back to Denver. We'll make him talk." But Marcus Vance didn't talk. Over the next 3 days, he sat in his cell with that cold smile and said nothing, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of his crimes. He'd made his empire on fear and secrecy, and he wasn't about to give up his last bit of leverage. Eleanor felt like she was drowning. They'd come so close, had done everything right, and Lily was still gone. She barely ate, barely slept, just sat in their boarding house room staring at nothing while Yates tried to hold her together, and Catherine worked frantically through every remaining record, looking for any hint of where Lily might have been taken. It was Catherine who finally found the answer, buried in a coded notation in one of Vance's personal journals. "There's a private establishment outside of Colorado Springs," she said, spreading the journal on the table in Marshall Garrett's office. "Vance only mentions it twice, and never by name, just as the Mountain House. But look here, 2 months ago he writes Preston girl to Mountain House, special client, that has to be Lily." Marshall Garrett studied the notation, then nodded. "I know the place. It's technically outside my jurisdiction, but given the circumstances, I think we can bend the rules. It's isolated, though, up in the mountains. We'll need to approach carefully." "I'm coming with you," Eleanor said immediately. "Madam, that's not protocol. I don't care about protocol. That's my sister. I've been searching for her for 5 years. I'm not waiting somewhere safe while you ride off without me." Marshall Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Eleanor's face stopped him. "Fine, but you do exactly what I say when I say it. Understood?" They left for Colorado Springs the next morning, a group of 6, Marshall Garrett and 2 of his deputies, Eleanor, Yates, and Catherine, who refused to be left behind after everything they'd been through together. The journey took 2 days, and every mile felt like an eternity to Eleanor. She was so close now, so close she could barely breathe with it. The Mountain House turned out to be exactly that. A large cabin built into the side of a mountain, isolated and surrounded by pine forest. It looked almost innocent, like a hunting lodge, which made what happened inside it even more obscene. Marshall Garrett surveyed it through field glasses, counting guards and planning their approach. "There's 4 men I can see, probably more inside. This isn't going to be a quiet operation." He looked at Eleanor. "You stay back until we've secured the building, I'm in it." The raid happened at dawn, the marshals moving in fast and hard. There was shouting, a few gunshots, then an eerie silence. Eleanor waited with Yates behind a stand of trees, her heart in her throat, until Marshall Garrett appeared at the door and waved them forward. Inside, the Mountain House was plush and disturbing, decorated like a rich man's parlor but with locks on all the bedroom doors. The guards had been subdued and were sitting against one wall in handcuffs. Marshall Garrett led Eleanor down a hallway. "There's 5 girls here. One of them matches your sister's description. She's in the last room on the left." Eleanor's legs felt like water. She walked down that hallway with Yates right behind her and stopped in front of the last door. It was standing open. Inside, sitting on a bed and wrapped in a blanket, was a girl with long blonde hair and eyes the same shade of blue as Eleanor's. She was older, changed, with a hardness in her face that broke Eleanor's heart, but she was alive. She was here. "Lily." Eleanor's voice came out as barely a whisper. The girl looked up, her expression wary. For a long, terrible moment, there was no recognition in her eyes. Then something shifted, flickered, and her face crumpled. "Eleanor." Eleanor crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her sister into her arms. Lily was shaking, sobbing, clinging to Eleanor like a drowning person to a lifeline. Eleanor held her and cried and said, "I've got you. I've got you. You're safe now. I'm so sorry it took so long, but I've got you, and I'm never letting go again." They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, while Yates stood quietly in the doorway giving them space. When Lily finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and wet, but there was something like hope in her eyes. "You really looked for me." Her voice was hoarse, like she wasn't used to using it much. All this time, every single day, Eleanor said fiercely. I never stopped, I never gave up. And I'm here now, and you're going to be okay, I promise. Lily looked past Eleanor to Yates. Who's that? That's Yates. He's the man I'm going to marry. He helped me find you. He's a good man, Lily. One of the best. Lily studied Yates for a moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you, she said softly, for helping her, for helping me. You don't need to thank me, Yates said gently. I'm just glad you're safe now. The journey back to Denver was slow, giving Lily time to adjust and recover. She was traumatized, that was obvious, flinching at sudden movements and waking up screaming from nightmares. But she was also strong, stronger than Eleanor had dared hope. She talked sometimes about what she'd endured, short, painful sentences that explained the haunted look in her eyes. Other times she was silent, staring out at the landscape like she couldn't quite believe she was free. Eleanor stayed close, relearning her sister, discovering who Lily had become in their 5 years apart. She was quieter than she'd been as a child, more careful, but there were glimpses of the girl Eleanor remembered. A sharp sense of humor that emerged unexpectedly, a love of horses, a fierce protectiveness over the other girls they'd rescued. Catherine and Elizabeth traveled with them, heading to Colorado Springs where Catherine had family who would take them in. The night before they parted ways, the 6 of them sat around a campfire and Catherine said, "What you did, going after Vance like that, it saved so many lives, not just ours. All those girls who were freed, you should be proud." "I just wanted my sister back," Eleanor said, "but I'm glad we could help others too." "What will you do now?" Elizabeth asked. She was slowly coming back to life, her smiles more frequent, her fear fading. "We're going back to Golden," Eleanor said, glancing at Yates. "We're going to build a life there, a good life." Back in Golden, Eleanor was surprised to find that Yates's ranch was even more beautiful than he described. The house was large and well built, sitting in a valley with mountains rising behind it. There was a big kitchen, multiple bedrooms, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was a place that felt like home immediately. Yates showed them around, giving Lily her choice of bedrooms and telling her she could change anything she wanted, make it truly hers. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Yates and Eleanor stood on the porch looking out at the stars. "I want to marry you," Yates said without preamble. "Soon. Not because I'm in a hurry, but because I've spent the last 2 months watching you fight for what you love, and I want to spend the rest of my life being one of the things you love. What do you say?" Eleanor turned to him, this man who had changed everything, who had given her back not just her sister but hope and joy and a future. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you tomorrow if you want." He laughed and kissed her. "Maybe let's give Lily a little time to settle in first, but soon. I promise." They were married in November, in the small church in Golden with half the town watching. Lily stood beside Eleanor as her only attendant, wearing a new dress and a genuine smile. It was the first time Eleanor had seen her really smile since they'd found her, and it was worth everything they'd been through to see it. The winter that followed was healing for all of them. Lily slowly came back to herself, working with the horses and learning to trust again. She still had nightmares, still had hard days, but Eleanor was always there, and Yates was patient and kind, giving Lily space when she needed it and support when she asked for it. Eleanor had never been so happy. Being married to Yates was everything she'd hoped and more. He was a passionate and attentive husband, and he treated Lily like family, never making her feel like a burden or an outsider. The 3 of them built a life together that felt solid and real and good. In the spring, they received a letter from Catherine. She and Elizabeth had settled in Colorado Springs, and Catherine had opened her own bookkeeping business. Elizabeth was going to school, making up for the education she'd lost, and they were both healing. The letter included a newspaper clipping. Marcus Vance had been sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. His empire had been completely dismantled, his properties seized, and the dozens of girls who'd been freed were starting new lives. "We did that," Eleanor said wonderingly, reading the article. "We actually did it." "You did it," Yates corrected, pulling her close. "You refused to give up and you changed the world. I'm proud of you." That summer, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure, but Yates was thrilled, already talking about nurseries and names. Lily was excited too, declaring that she was going to be the best aunt in Colorado. Their son was born in January of 1882, during a snowstorm that buried the ranch under 3 feet of powder. He had Yates's blue eyes and Eleanor's stubborn chin, and they named him Thomas, after Eleanor's father, because Eleanor had decided she wanted to reclaim that name, give it a new meaning untainted by betrayal and pain. Lily adored her nephew, spending hours with him, singing him the songs she was slowly remembering from their childhood. Her voice was beautiful, clear, and strong, and hearing it again made Eleanor cry with happiness. Lily was finding her way back to herself, and it was glorious to witness. Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter named Grace came in 1884, with her father's blonde hair and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone. Then another son, James, in 1886, who was quiet and thoughtful from birth. The house that had been too empty for Yates was now filled with noise and laughter and life, exactly as he'd hoped. Lily stayed with them, becoming an integral part of the family. She never married, though she had suitors. She said she was content being an aunt and helping run the ranch, working with the horses she loved. Eleanor suspected there was more to it, that Lily was still healing from wounds that went too deep for romance, but she didn't push. Lily would find her own path in her own time. In 1888, when Thomas was 6 and full of questions, he asked Eleanor about her father, his grandfather. Eleanor took him out to the porch and sat him down and told him the truth, age-appropriate but honest. She told him about the mine accident and the grief and the terrible choice her father had made. She told him about searching for Lily, about Yates helping her, about the rescue and the justice and the healing. "Your grandfather made a horrible mistake," Eleanor said, holding her son's small hand. "And I will always be angry about that. But I also learned that we get to choose who we become. We get to choose whether we let the bad things that happen to us make us cruel or make us kind. Your father and I choose kindness, and we're teaching you to choose it too." Thomas nodded seriously, processing this. Then he said, "Did Aunt Lily forgive him?" Eleanor glanced through the window to where Lily was inside, bouncing Grace on her hip while James pulled at her skirts. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's something you'd have to ask her. Forgiveness is complicated, and everyone has to find their own way to it." Later, when the children were in bed, Eleanor asked Lily that question herself. They were sitting on the porch in the warm summer evening, watching the sun set over the mountains. Lily was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't think I've forgiven him. I don't know if I ever will, but I've let go of the anger because carrying it was too heavy. And I've found my own life, my own happiness, and that matters more than whatever he did or didn't do. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Eleanor said, taking her sister's hand. "I'm so proud of you, Lily, so proud of who you've become." "I'm proud of you too. You never gave up on me. Even when it would have been easier to move on, to build your own life and let me go, you didn't. You came for me. You saved me." "I'll never forget that." They sat there in comfortable silence, two sisters who had survived hell and come out the other side, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under Yates's management, and he became known as one of the fairest employers in Colorado. Eleanor threw herself into helping other women in difficult situations, using her own story to raise money and awareness for organizations fighting against human trafficking. She and Catherine maintained a steady correspondence, comparing notes and supporting each other's work. In 1892, when Eleanor was 30 years old, she received word that her father had died. He'd been living in a charity house in Denver, his health destroyed by years of drinking and laudanum. Eleanor felt a complicated mix of emotions at the news: grief for the father he'd been before the mine accident, anger at what he'd done, and a strange, unexpected pity for the broken man he'd become. She and Lily traveled to Denver for the funeral. It was a small affair, just the two of them and a priest. As they stood over the grave, Lily said quietly, "I don't forgive him, but I hope he found peace at the end. I hope he understood what he did and was sorry for it." "I hope so too," Eleanor said. On the way back to Golden, they stopped at a meadow full of wildflowers, and Lily picked a bouquet. "These are for Mama," she said. "For the mother who would have protected us if she'd lived. For the parent he should have been." They placed the flowers on a rock, a memorial to what should have been, then continued home to the family they'd built despite everything. By 1895, Thomas was 13 and already talking about becoming a rancher like his father. Grace, at 11, was fascinated by books and learning, constantly asking Eleanor to teach her new things. James, at 9, was quiet and artistic, spending hours drawing the mountains and horses and his family. And Lily, now 30, had finally opened up to the possibility of romance, tentatively courting a gentle widower named Robert who worked at the general store in town. Eleanor watched her sister bloom in this new relationship, carefully letting herself be vulnerable again, and felt her heart swell with pride and love. Lily deserved happiness, deserved love, and Eleanor was thrilled to see her finding it. One evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Yates sat on their porch as they had so many times before. Yates pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling peaceful and content. "You ever think about that night in Santa Fe?" Yates asked. "When I first told you I'd fallen for you, all the time," Eleanor admitted. "That was the night everything changed, the night I realized I didn't have to do everything alone anymore. Best decision I ever made, helping you in that saloon. Got me the love of my life and a family I wouldn't trade for anything." Yates kissed her temple. "You've made me so happy, Eleanor, every single day. You've made me happy too, more than I ever thought possible. You gave me back my sister, you gave me love, you gave me this life. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that. You don't need to thank me. Loving you isn't something I do for gratitude. It's something I do because I can't imagine doing anything else." They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Two people who had found each other in the midst of darkness and built something beautiful together. In 1897, Lily married Robert in a ceremony that had Eleanor crying happy tears through the entire thing. Lily moved into town with her new husband, but she visited the ranch constantly, and Eleanor visited her just as often. The bond between the sisters, forged in trauma and tempered by survival, was unbreakable. That same year, Eleanor turned 35, and Yates surprised her with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Lily and Robert and spent a week in the city, staying in a nice hotel and attending the theater and dining in fancy restaurants. It was a different life from their ranch existence, but Eleanor found she didn't miss it when they returned home. Golden was where she belonged, surrounded by the family she'd fought so hard to keep together. As they rode back to the ranch, the mountains rising around them and the sun warm on their faces. Yates said, "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" Eleanor smiled, reaching across to take his hand. "Not in the last hour. I was starting to worry." He laughed and pulled her close for a kiss. "I love you, Eleanor Sutton, today, tomorrow, and every day after that for the rest of my life." "I love you too," she said softly. "Thank you for everything. For believing in me, for helping me save Lily, for giving me this life. Thank you for being exactly who you are." When they arrived home, the children came running out to greet them, all three of them talking at once about what they'd done while their parents were gone. Lily and Robert were there too, having stayed to help watch the kids, and the house was full of noise and warmth and love. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Eleanor stood in the doorway of each of her children's rooms, watching them sleep. Thomas sprawled across his bed, already too big for it. Grace curled up with a book still clutched in her hands. James with charcoal smudges on his fingers from his drawings. Each of them perfect and precious and proof that good things could come from even the darkest beginnings. She thought about the girl she'd been at 13, watching her father sell her sister and vowing to get her back. She thought about the years of struggle and searching, the desperation and fear. She thought about meeting Yates and falling in love and finally finding Lily. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, standing in her own home surrounded by love and safety and family. The damage her father had done was real and lasting. Lily still had nightmares sometimes. Eleanor still felt a flash of panic when she couldn't see her sister for a few days. The scars were there and always would be, but they'd healed around those scars. They'd built lives worth living, found love worth keeping, created a family that was whole and happy despite everything. And that, Eleanor thought, was its own kind of justice. Her father had tried to destroy them and they'd survived. More than survived. They'd flourished. Eleanor went back downstairs to find Yates waiting for her, his hand extended. She took it, let him pull her into his arms, and danced with him in their quiet kitchen to music only they could hear. This was her life now. This love, this family, this happiness so hard-won and deeply cherished. She'd spent 5 years trying to undo the damage done, and she'd succeeded in ways she never could have imagined back then. Not by erasing what happened, that was impossible, but by refusing to let it define them, by building something beautiful out of the ashes. By choosing love over bitterness, hope over despair, forgiveness over endless anger. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led her here, to this kitchen, to this man, to this life. And as Yates held her close and whispered that he loved her, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that every hard step had been worth it. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking on more responsibility at the ranch and eventually courting a girl from town whose family owned the bank. Grace, brilliant and determined, became a teacher, opening a small school in Golden and advocating for girls' education with a passion that made Eleanor proud. James, quiet and artistic, moved to Denver to study art, his paintings eventually hanging in galleries across the West. Lily and Robert had 2 children of their own, a daughter and a son, and watching Lily become a mother was one of the most beautiful things Eleanor had ever witnessed. Lily was gentle and protective, giving her children all the love and security she'd been denied for so many years. She was a wonderful mother, and her children adored her. In 1905, Eleanor and Yates celebrated their 24th anniversary. They were in their 40s now, silver threading through their hair, laugh lines deepening around their eyes. But they were still deeply in love, still reaching for each other first thing in the morning and last thing at night, still finding joy in simple moments together. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Eleanor said as they sat on their porch, watching yet another Colorado sunset. "That saloon in Golden where we first met, where you stood up for me against Vance." Yates smiled. "I was thinking about that too, actually. How scared you looked, but how brave. How I knew right then that you were someone special. I thought you were crazy, helping a stranger. I couldn't understand why you do it. And now I know it's just who you are. You see someone who needs help and you help them. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with you." Yates pulled her closer. "I fell in love with you because you never gave up. Because you had every reason to become bitter and hard, but you chose kindness instead. Because you're the strongest person I know and also the most loving. Because you're you, Eleanor, and there's no one else I'd rather spend my life with." Eleanor kissed him, pouring decades of love into it. When they pulled apart, she said, "Promise me something, anything. Promise me that when we're old and gray and sitting on this porch in our rocking chairs, you'll still hold my hand and tell me you love me. Eleanor, I'll be holding your hand and telling you I love you until my last breath. And probably after that, if there's any way to do it." They sat there as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in glorious colors. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last forever. In 1910, Eleanor received word that Marcus Vance had died in prison. She felt a grim satisfaction at the news, knowing that justice had been served, that he'd spent his final years locked away, unable to hurt anyone else. She visited his grave once, not to forgive him but to stand over it and say, "We survived you. We built beautiful lives despite you, and we won." Lily went with her, standing silent beside her sister at the grave of the man who had destroyed so much. Finally, she said, "He's gone now, really gone. And we're still here, still fighting, still loving, still living. I think that's the best revenge we could ever have." They left the graveyard together, two sisters who had been through hell and come out holding hands, and went home to the families they'd built and the lives they'd fought for. As the years passed into the 1910s, Eleanor and Yates became grandparents multiple times over. Thomas and his wife had 4 children who loved visiting the ranch. Grace's students sent her letters years after they'd left her classroom, telling her how she'd changed their lives. James's art was exhibited in New York, and he brought his new wife to meet the family, proud and happy. Lily's children grew up knowing they were loved and safe, never experiencing the horrors their mother had endured. They called Eleanor Aunt Nell and Yates Uncle Yates, and spent long summer weeks at the ranch, learning to ride and listening to stories about the old days. In 1918, on a warm spring evening, Eleanor and Yates sat on their porch as they had countless times before. They were in their 50s now, their bodies bearing the marks of a life well lived. But their love was as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger, deepened by decades of shared experiences and unwavering commitment. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on a desperate girl in a saloon, turning your whole life upside down to help her?" Yates turned to her, his blue eyes still as clear and kind as they'd been that first night. "Not for one single second. Eleanor, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Lily and our children and this whole beautiful, complicated life we've built together. If I could go back and do it all again, I wouldn't change a thing." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears, grateful tears. "I love you so much, Yates. You saved me. You saved both of us. And you gave us a life worth living." "You saved yourself," Yates said gently. "You were already fighting when I met you. I just helped clear some obstacles out of your way. Everything else, all this love and joy and family, you built that yourself. You and Lily. I just got lucky enough to be part of it." They sat there as the stars emerged, holding hands the way they had for decades. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. Eleanor thought about that 13-year-old girl watching her sister being sold, making a vow that seemed impossible. She thought about the years of struggle and the moment she'd found Yates. She thought about the raid and the reunion and the healing that had followed. She thought about their wedding and their children and the life they'd built in this house in Golden, Colorado. Her father had sold Lily, and Eleanor had spent years trying to undo that damage. But she'd done more than undo it. She'd transformed it. She'd taken that tragedy and turned it into triumph, that pain into purpose, that loss into love. She'd saved her sister and found her soulmate and built a family that was strong and whole and filled with joy. The damage was real, and it would always be part of their story. But it wasn't the end of their story, not even close. The end was this: a warm night in Colorado, surrounded by family and love, with her husband's hand in hers and her sister's laughter drifting from inside the house where she was visiting with the grandchildren. This was their happily ever after, hard-won and deeply cherished. And as Yates leaned over to kiss her temple and whisper that he loved her, Eleanor knew that every single struggle had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment of peace and love and home. They stayed on that porch long into the night, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for the future, reminiscing about the past. And when they finally went inside, it was hand in hand, the way they'd done everything for the past 38 years. Together, strong, unbreakable. Eleanor Preston Sutton had been just 13 when her world shattered. But she'd picked up the pieces, found new pieces to add to them, and built something even more beautiful than what had been broken. She'd saved her sister, found true love, raised a family, and helped countless others along the way. And if that wasn't a happy ending, she didn't know what was.